us begin with giving thanks and praises to the Most High, Jah Rastafari, and remember our ancestors who began and continue to fight for our Black lives that matter. I am Dr. Lantwana Stines, your moderator for this morning's Reasoning. As you are aware, our esteemed presenter this morning is Dr. Jahlani Edwin Hamid Niaah. Jahlani from Swahili, Jah meaning God Almighty. Lani means gift of God. The full meaning, powerful and mighty. Edwin, artist, intellectual. Hamid, who is lauded. Niaah, well, I couldn't find Niaah spelled like that, you know. But it definitely has the tonation and sound energy of Niaah Bingi, the tribe of the revolutionaries from Rwanda, led by Queen Niaah Bingi. I remember as a PhD candidate watching Jahlani, lovingly cared for the wise teacher of Robert Nesta Marley, the revered Mortimer Planner. Jahlani, then a young Rastafari, started at his feet learning not only about Rasta, but I'm sure also about himself. Even then I thought he definitely possessed Zeit. Zeit is what you get in Jerusalem schoolroom, a virtual space in which only the chosen are allowed. Zeit is not in the dictionary. Zeit is my coinage conjugated from the inner city expression, you see me? Using the Z or the Z reflects the reverence of Zion. Zion is situated in heaven where knowledge and the wisdom of the Most High resides. Zeit is the ability to see and perceive profoundly as a spiritual zeitist, which is more than visual sight. From looking at the massive amount of work of Dr. Jahlani Niaah, boy, it is obvious that he has shared space in the Jerusalem schoolroom with the ancestors who bled and died, teaching, screaming from the graves and from the bowels of the ocean that Black lives matter. We use the word resistance and revolution for one primary purpose: freedom to be us. Black Lives Matter is a contemporary and relevant expression for the now generation. But let us bow our heads and remember Nani of the Maroons, Kojo, Sam Sharp, the Zulus, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Let's remember everybody, and especially the Rastafari who died in the Coral Gardens massacre. Those people began screaming Black Lives Matter. Jahlani Edwin Hamid Niaah holds a PhD in Cultural Studies and lectures in Rastafari Studies in the Institute of Caribbean Studies, University of the West Indies, Mona campus. Niaah is actively engaged with working on the issues of African retentions, reparation for African slavery, and the phenomenon of Rastafari repatriation to Ethiopia. Niaah has co-edited 3 books and has published in leading journals. Now, the publishing in leading journals, you know, is a whole heap in the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and Europe. He has recently completed his much anticipated book, Lamb's Bread, Rastafari and Ganja in Jamaica, which is forthcoming from the Udo Ablai Press. The Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies Mona campus presents in the series The Humanities in Action, #Black Lives Matter, the historical quest to respect Black bodies and lives. I am honored and humbled to present Dr. Jahlani Niaah with his offering, Rastafari, and the struggle to make Black lives matter. I give you Dr. Niaah.
Give thanks, Queen Mother, Dr. Lantwana Stines. I have never had quite such an introduction before. I really thank you and appreciate the time and thoughts you put into presenting me this morning. And thank you to the Humanities in Action series for considering me. I wish to begin first by greeting you in the names of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I, and Her Imperial Majesty, Empress Waziri Menin. In particular, I wish to connect this hashtag Black Lives Matter to Rastafari, and therefore I wish to also invoke the names of some of our honored rebel ancestors of this tradition. In the first generation, I invoke the name of Leonard Howell, Robert Hines, Joseph Hibbert, Archibald Dunkley. In the next generation, I invoke the name of King Emmanuel Charles Edwards, Mortimer Planner, Rasbona G's Watto, Bunga Puru, Bunga Rocky, Mama Baby Eye, Ras Sidney Da Silva, Ras Historian, Ras Shaggy Berry. In the third generation, I invoke the name of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Jacob Miller, Dennis Brown, Bunga Sheffan. In the fourth generation, I invoke the name of Ras Iration, Sister Ijania Christian, Ras Ikel Tafari, Ras Makonnen, Sister Dawn Scott, Sister Adugu Onooro. And there are others, now numbering too many to account here. I thank and honor you all today. In moving to address my conversation or reasoning here, it is my intention to connect the trending hashtag Black Lives Matter to Rastafari, even while unapologetically asserting that Rastafari has long been there, and beyond that, hashtag Black Lives Matter. I am structuring this conversation as follows. I first will generally locate Rastafari as a worldview. I will next move to generally locate the Black Lives Matter hashtag from this point of analysis here today. And then I will move to draw a distinction between hashtag Black Lives Matter in relation to Rastafari specifically, while identifying the fact that the movement and the devotees are different from Rastafari, the person himself. I then am going to move into a discussion of Rastafari as an African Jamaican ethos or spirit, or as an active intellectual sensibility occurring across Jamaica and throughout the region, African diaspora in particular, and look at this ethos in the context of Black Lives Matter as to what kind of futures or possibilities there might exist. Firstly, I want to identify Rastafari as the largest and most unified global Pan-African liberation movement existing today. Numbers estimated between 15 and 50 million globally. This is a movement emerging out of Jamaica, anchored in Garveyism and Bedouardism influences. I would argue that it could be compared as far as its purpose, its longevity, and success to a national organization such as the African National Congress of South Africa, the ANC, which is slightly older than this movement, having been established in 1912. And differently focused, of course. Or it could be compared to the Nation of Islam, which began in the United States in the early to mid 1930s, about the same time that the Rastafari movement was to emerge itself. This movement of Rastafari is explicitly Ethiopianist and draws spiritual source inspiration from the personality of the Ethiopian emperor, deemed the prophetic incarnation of the Almighty Creator, and prophesied to redeem Africans from their oppressive journeys in the West. The movement itself has spread not just as a Jamaican phenomenon, and I think this has been highly linked to its internationalism at its genesis, a Jamaican movement with Pan-African and global connections from its inception. Movement is largely male dominant. It takes on various kinds of expressions as far as congregations, but overarchingly, there is a centrality focus on the sovereign king of Ethiopia and Africa as a space for actualizing the highest good for Africans. In this context, Babylon is presented as a counterpoint to Zion, which is Ethiopia. And most Rastafari subscribe to some version of that critique and desire for fulfillment. On the other hand, Black Lives Matter is a relatively new movement, but could be more specifically defined as a communication and teaching tool driven by a North American-based African diaspora, largely contributed by women, students, sporting figures, millennials, and the surrounding age groups, and holds as its primary strategy the new medias and the use of new media to assist in its mobilization of its intent and purpose. It has been one of the biggest Pan-African communication successes, perhaps in the history of our struggle, as it comes at the hands of a particularly poignant period of public availability and public time. But it also has come at the hands of tremendous continuous martyrdom and sacrifice, now being better documented and more virally shared, and hence the universal outrage and response as a movement, Black Lives Matter. In a sense, the Black Lives Matter communication tool is an opportune one, which has come to our availability at a particularly critical moment for humanity. And I'm referring to that in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. It has captured hyper reality in the sense that there is almost a ubiquitous involvement of the international in the condition and the crisis now in North America. And this has contributed to various kinds of responses. But the idea is that Black lives are now trending, and the violence against Black people is now trending. and there is a trending reaction that the Black Lives Matter hashtag has been able to combine itself with. In a sense, the critique of Black Lives Matter as a hashtag might relate to its tone of ultimate frustration and fatigue on the part of the African American. A frustration and fatigue that has been largely led by mothers, sisters, women, women who have become tired of the trauma and violence, particularly faced by young African males. Understandably, the tone of the hashtag has a sense of surrender, and the visual symbols related to that hashtag have come by way of the hands up or I give up gesture. And I just want to remark that that is distinctly different from the fist held high during the 1960s, which was more the tone of what might have been another hashtag if this were the time, which is the Black Power movement, which also involved influential African Americans, artists, sports figures, etc. I wish to move now to look at the Black Lives Matter hashtag in relation to Rastafari. And I'm referring to the prince who turned king, turned emperor, Haile Selassie I. This I will explore by a brief view of how it is that I think he emerges on the world scene at a time that connected and made sense of what we are now calling the Black Lives Matter hashtag. His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie is an important 20th century beginning of this trending Black Lives Matter hashtag. His Majesty ushers in a period of modern Ethiopianism, and many of us will recall Ethiopianism is a kind of Black Lives Matter hashtag developed in the 18th century, where enslaved and colonized Africans in the West started to peruse the Bible to see themselves, and Ethiopia was that one linguistic retention that they could see blackness through. And this was indeed in an effort to put on the front burner the importance of Black lives, not just as slave lives, but as lives that were indelible in history and having contributed positively. New Ethiopianism, which comes into being through His Majesty, or what we in the literature describe as modern Ethiopianism, is a period of newfound pride in the ancient peoples and empire Ethiopian, that civilization. And Ethiopia, in this sense, is not just read as the small highland space that we now understand as that nation state, but Ethiopia is a reference to Africa. Africa was not so well used as a political term then. And Ethiopia took pride of place being excavated by the Pan-African search to understand itself as the cradle of mankind, and in the more spiritual sense, the place where God himself loved to dwell. The project of modern Ethiopianism, therefore, is brought into view through the 19th and 20th century actions of Ethiopian sovereigns, first starting with Emperor Menelik, who became determined that in a world of gross European colonization, Ethiopian diplomacy and Ethiopian civilization had to become a part of a community of modern nations. And Menelik II, in the late 19th century, began a mission of modernizing Ethiopia, developing its new capital, Addis Ababa. And this is a mandate that became the mission of Emperor Haile Selassie after he took the throne in 1930. The emperor is one who we understand as being a keen international figure. And this internationalism of the emperor is in an attempt to break down the dominance of the European colonial nations in determining and guiding world affairs. The emperor, early in his reign, supported the project of advancing Ethiopian international diplomacy by taking the unusual step to travel himself, to introduce himself on the world scene, all in a bid to navigate the absence of African leadership on the world platform. Soon enough, His Majesty comes to public attention. As early as 1924, University of Cambridge issues the first honorary doctorate to him, citing him as the hope of the African people. He, at this time, still a young man, not yet crowned king, but having been a part of Ethiopian political administration from age 13, became a figure much scrutinized, not just within Ethiopia, but internationally. There was a clear understanding, I think, from most world figures by the time of his coronation in 1930, that this prince turned king turned emperor was an important figure to behold in the African world. Now, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, I think, is demonstrated in a number of instances by his gestures. I'm talking about Rastafari's gestures to the African diaspora. The first we see coming in 1922, when he made motions to join the League of Nations as an equal. The League of Nations then represented world governance as orchestrated through colonial rule. So a few European nations were in a club that claimed to be the world. His Majesty, as one of the few sovereign African countries, chose to join that organization in 1922. And we realized that this was a strategic move because a decade and a half later, when Italy invaded him, he was able to return in person to the League to appeal for their intervention to protect one of its members who had been oppressed or aggressed by another member country. Now, this 1936 plea of Ethiopia at the League of Nations is an important highlight because it is the first time that we see in international politics an African sovereign seeking to engage with a world body which didn't exist before this time to have an African continental issue resolved. The League did nothing because one of its sisters, Italy, had acted in a way that they supported. Europe had fully colonized Africa, and Italy's designs on Ethiopia were somewhat encouraged by virtue of the League's inaction. Haile Selassie at this time warns the League that their refusal to engage in the principle of collective security as laid down in their charter would cause their own demise. And we understand that the League of Nations does not survive the Second World War. In fact, the prophetic words of His Majesty was that the match struck in Ethiopia would burn in Europe. And we see by 1939, Europe is faced with war, which goes on for a while. Excuse me. His Imperial Majesty becomes the first sovereign out of Africa to return to his throne after invasion and occupation by a European country. And this was in 1941 when he returned to the throne, somewhat in celebration of this achievement. He had actually become the darling of the international world and become the first significant African sovereign to have perhaps an unprejudicial regard among a community of nations. I highlight the work of His Imperial Majesty as an important foundation context to understand the key motivations of Rastafari, what it is that propels, guides, and advises Rastafari as far as way of being and way of operating. So His Imperial Majesty becomes the representative icon, the father of African redemption and the father of Africa re-emergence and development. He orchestrates in 1963 the establishment of the Organization for African Unity, now the AU, as a forum not just to promote the expulsion of Europe from the continent and promote decolonization of member states, but as a way of galvanizing strength and development for the African continent in a way that its resources afforded if unmolested by European intervention. He leaves the Organization of African Unity and makes perhaps his most famous speech, or his speech made most famous by the work of Bob Marley in that song War, where he declares to the United Nations the lessons learned from the continent of Africa as it relates to peace and human equity and justice. And he pronounces that until inequity disappears, there will be no peace, there will be war. And these are words that we have come to understand in more than one way. This is what the Black Lives Matter hashtag really confronts, the issue of war because of discrimination. So layering the work of His Majesty perhaps gets to its highest fervor when we recognize his connections with Africans in Jamaica and the Caribbean. And this demonstrates internationalism of his work that is unsurpassed by anyone to date, where Africans in Jamaica and in the Caribbean felt comfortable in claiming him. And he took time in 1966 to visit the region where he toured Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, and Haiti. That trip in and of itself is a spirited demonstration of Black Lives Matter. The first highly decorated African sovereign to touch down in Jamaica saw an extraordinary reception from the population, one still unparalleled in our history. It's said that over 100,000 Jamaicans descended on the airport to see his arrival, and the streets of Kingston, right across Jamaica, when he moved, were overpouring with persons seeking to have a glimpse of him. in a real sense, the visit of His Majesty to Jamaica not just supported and affirmed Rastafari as a valid citizen, and this validity he was to support by awarding medals to members of the movement. He didn't do this to any other features of society. But his arrival here, in a sense, gave Black people, perhaps for the first time, a sense of royalty and sovereign bearing, ancestry, genuine respectability, one that they were unaccustomed to. And this is one of the testimonies of Rastafari, that from the moment of the coronation of His Majesty, the revelation of Black improvement, Black dignity, Black civilization, Black supremacy was a very clear and obvious feature that they had previously no example of. In a real sense, the movements of the 20th century emperor of Ethiopia are somewhat very much in keeping with the communication skills or tools of the Black Lives Matter hashtag. He was completely progressive with technology. His coronation became one of the first events that was properly documented in all media, including color footage and extensive color photography, later shared and published globally. His coming into the world stage on the 20th century as dawning became a clear new light for Africans in understanding not just their own heritage, but their capacity and potential. And if we understand Rastafari as anchored and linked to the Garvey movement, well, Marcus Garvey, who is considered one of the forerunners, prophets within Rastafari, Marcus Garvey himself was fixated with this hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And we see that variously through his philosophies and opinions and his work, but most acutely, I think, in his quest for the African man of big affairs, the African man of international affairs, the African man of economy, of shipping, etc. And these were things he tried to secure as an African leader. But His Imperial Majesty has had the world attention and ability to deliver this. And Rastafari leaders, or the would-be Rastafari leaders, how will I mention before, in scrutinizing the international and Ethiopia in particular, arrived early at an understanding that this leader was not just prophetic, but had come to ordain expectations of African redemption. I want to move from His Majesty to the movement inspired by him, to argue, therefore, that Rastafari sees itself as emissaries, agents, operatives of His Imperial Majesty with the likewise mandates that he performed, speaking to authority, speaking to power, and a defender of justice and African redemption and liberation. I wish to suggest that the first teachers of the movement successfully oriented their congregations to understand His Majesty as Black Redeemer. And by that I mean that you would not within white supremacy see or find the possibility for African celebration genuinely. So the fact is that King Alpha and Queen Omega, His Imperial Majesty and Empress Mane, had come as mother and father of the African rebirth. Their majesties, in bringing this rebirth, were the essence of Black supremacy. Now, Howell taught Black supremacy not as a relational supremacy to white supremacy, but as Black supremacy he taught his followers as a substitute for the word civilization. And in doing this, Howell gets at the crux of the myth of the civilizing white supremacist mission, that it was good and progressive for Africans, by saying that those civilized journeys that we were taking on by white supremacy did nothing more than to turn our men into kwashi, our women into prostitutes, our children into dogs. And therefore, Black supremacy is offered by Howell as a word to substitute the word civilization. And this is the moment of beginning for Rastafari in its Black supremacist foundations. Howell, I think, becomes the first of a new faculty of interpretation, being able to bring a news of deliverance of the Africans, of a reordering of the world, a decolonization of European authority, and more or less a shifting of the balance of power in favor of the Africans if they began to understand themselves. And this becomes the journey of Rastafari to bring a sort of awakening to the surrounding population. I've mentioned Rastafari as a new faculty of interpretation. That's not my coinage. That actually comes from the work of Mortimer Planner. And in so coining, he recognizes Rastafari as offering a teacher, preacher, leadership context that becomes the facility for what is described as conscientization, or that of giving people a sense of their situation by explaining its context and helping them to arrive at solutions. This new faculty of interpretation, this teacher, preacher, teacher, leader context is perhaps the template that the average Rastafari is operating within and perhaps fixated within. So Rastafari journey, Rastafari liberty becomes now a demonstration of this Black Lives Matter through unpacking histories, unpacking politics, but essentially in seeking to arrive at a constructive critique and strategy for understanding what is deemed as Babylon and recognizing a strategy for solutions out of Babylon. This fraternity, I argue, becomes formalized in informal ways, and the formalization of the Rastafari teaching, reasoning, fraternity is really that product of reggae music. Trenchtown becomes the university, or the veritable university of the inner city, and the published findings, documents, facts becomes that proliferation of songs, records, albums. If we think our population is inarticulate or unsophisticated in getting ideas out, well, just remember the productive engine that Trenchtown is as far as an economy. And Trenchtown becomes just a signifier for Kingston, Jamaica, and the music production capacity. So the leadership work of His Majesty becomes converged within the local movement that go by his name, Rastafari, as a framework for awakening the society. And reggae music becomes the most successful, almost high watermark that is produced as a medium, a catalog of experiences, of theories, of ambitions, of visions, of instructions, a revolution indeed of the mind that has been artfully processed and refined into a musical tool. And this is not incidental. It comes out of a deeper history of ancestral festival and festivity that have always been musical. In fact, the argument that reggae became a commercial version as opposed to a strictly sacred version is often imposed by those who don't see the logic of reggae as a way of telescoping this very Jamaican idea onto a wider and larger platform, which I think Rastafari has been able to effectively do in a cost-effective way. So the genre has become the major output source in conceptualizing this conversation of Black Lives Matter within Rastafari, and in getting it out to a bigger public. And you know, the reggae in particular is intriguingly cited in a Jamaican language or idiom, but it also has this universal language through its English colonial heritage. And reggae, therefore, has been able to penetrate boundaries on the backside of the lingua franca that English is. Reggae has become food, philosophy, Bible, inspiration, catharsis, the portable Rastafari revolution, and has been able to take this message and this movement into the global demographics I mentioned, where there are anything between 15 to 50 million. And if you were to add those people who are just reggae aficionados and not consider themselves Rastafari, then you're getting into larger numbers. And if you were to add the people who use ganja as sacrament, then you get into even larger numbers. So the point is that reggae has provided quality in the framing of resistance, and even within the trending Black Lives Matter hashtag, reggae music and the feel of reggae has been an important part of this throughout the North American space. Just to mention a key critical, and I see that I'm going into too much time, a key critical advantage of this current trending Black Lives Matter hashtag has been its internationalization of the African American himself, where African Americans, I think, have remained isolated from the global struggle in a way that the other diasporas are not able to. You know, they consider themselves more self-contained, wealthier, and you know, a different kind of experience, being minorities in a majority white situations. They have been somewhat estranged from this larger movement of Black Lives Matter. And I think that this conversation now has perhaps broken down some of those issues that may otherwise have emerged. The embrace of celebrity as part of the appeal of the campaign is an important ingredient, and the intrigue for us is that Rastafari, in fashioning Black Lives Matter, has created its own celebrity. And, you know, the people like Peter Tosh and Bob Marley, Burning Spear, etc., have been key in these conversations. Musicians such as Burning Spear have not only resurrected, but have directed the teaching of Marcus Garvey and the critique of who he describes Columbus as a damn blasted liar. You know, we've been taught a kind of audacity in tearing down certain kinds of farcical monuments of the past through the journey of Rastafari, Reggae, and Black Lives Matter. I just want to close, since I realize that I've, you know, going a little beyond the time I had anticipated, by saying that if there is a major challenge with Black Lives Matter, is the fact that it refers mainly to a symptom versus a structure, a body politic. Its symptom is that of offering a local, it's almost like I can't breathe statement. It's not dissimilar in its incompleteness. It doesn't take us to the next point. So I think still what is omitted from the moment through Black Lives Matter is a new hashtag that would say Africa Matters or Africa Now. And in so saying, we inevitably cover what we are now describing as Black Lives Matter. The further critique of Black Lives Matter, and understandably it highlights systemic atrocities on Africans in a way that other people have not necessarily seen this, is that it continues to perpetuate a plantation and colonial slave way of seeing the world in relation to color of black and white. So humanity as a category becomes reduced to the very thing that His Majesty reminds us of, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, then there will be war. That is it for me. I wish to close. There's much that I would have wanted to say, but I figure it's better if I shut up now and allow for some engagement with the ideas. I hope the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart have been acceptable to you, O Jah, Rastafari.
Blessings, Dr. Niaah, I think he just gave us 3 or 4 lectures in the time that you spent, and I don't think anybody wanted you to shut up. I think everybody was so into what you were saying that they don't even know that time has passed. I have a question to ask, sir. You know, I believe that everything that you said, we have been educated through music. We have been educated through example. There is no, the whole liberty of Rastafari seems to be a Jerusalem schoolroom that is not a physical space. But there are plenty who would like to study Rasta. You gave us a historical information that it comes to you from years of research and sitting at the feet of many elders. But do you think in the future, because you started honoring the various generations, do you think in the future, we who started the concept of university, we started in a Eurocentric space, we started it, Africa started it. that this generation might take us towards a physical space of learning for everything that you just sat here and shared, because that's a lot of courses you just did a while ago.
Well, the space that I presently am in is a herb camp,
Yes.
and this is the productive engine of Rastafari.
Okay.
It's the space that the sacrament is shared and
Okay.
reasoning occurs. So it's been an overlooked space because of the criminalization of ganja. So
Yes.
it has remained a subversive space up until now. A part of my own location in these spaces is not just to gain my own understanding better and my knowledge as far as process and philosophy and ideas and being, but it's also to say that I think these spaces have been badly affected by the system, you know. So in the past, they were the productive points of Rastafari meeting. Drums would be present, instruments would be there, and a range of, and there's still these spaces. Chino Smith is such a space, St. Andrew Park. The space around the dancer, your sister, that
Patsy Ricketts.
yes, Patsy. That's a whole production space that's similar. The camp is slightly different, but wherever I and I come together, we more or less have camp in that sense, you know. So elements are existing in various places. In fact, the way a camp becomes relevant is when it has a certain quality of resources, including teachers and those people who come into the space. Because the camp is the Jerusalem schoolroom, you know. There's
Yes.
attendance every day. If I'm absent one day, I get a telephone call, everything all right. And it becomes a systems check. It's what they...
Also, is that also the present in the are the mansions, spaces of the various mansions?
All right. So the critical issue within Rastafari is how do we survive on a day-to-day space, day-to-day way. They are mansions, but most people who say Rastafari are not necessarily intimately linked to a mansion.
Right.
The bubbles are perhaps the most distinct as being connected to a certain tradition. And in terms of their own experience and history, they have organized a method that is global. You know, there are congresses, as the Bubba Shanti space is called, in all the Caribbean islands and beyond. You know, Ghana has a big resettlement project. You know, Bubba exists like Bubba in Jamaica in a very specific way with a training and an economy and an aesthetic that is replicatable. So Bubba have kind of situated themselves in a way that they have development of the new membership in a more systematic way. The Nyabingi doesn't perform like that because its congregations come together more or less through ritual celebration, and those ritual celebrations are bingis, where the community does duty, as it is called, and that duty is really honoring the ancestors or the moment or the victory. So there are Nyabingi celebrations for the Battle of Adwa, which was 1896, the first Black Lives Matter Ethiopian expelling the Italians from the continent. There are Nyabingis for the visit of His Majesty to Jamaica. And the point is, in celebrating these days, Rastafari uses them as teaching tools to transfer between generations and understanding of martyrdom, sacrifice, journey, and development. Ironically, however, we don't necessarily acknowledge development. You know, the community is very demanding on itself. So it cannot necessarily appreciate the work it has achieved with very little in a global way.
You mentioned how his Emperor Haile Selassie took a very strategic position when he joined the League of Nations. Is there someone said to me once, every 100 years, a major leader is born. Do you see anyone in this time who, I think it's an impossible question, follow in the footsteps of his emperor to take steps such as what was done in 1922? Because we are still needing, for us to be successful with the cause of hashtag Black Lives Matter, we still have to be fighting a lot of causes. But do we see anyone?
Well,
or is Rastafari as a whole doing it?
That's the answer. What you stated about a certain quality of leadership, a movement like Rastafari is called a millennial movement. So yes. I would say it's once every 1,000 years. That
yes, I think that 1,000 years. I think I should have said 1,000 years.
Yeah,
yes.
That kind of soul journey on earth with us. Now think about it. His Majesty has not been physically present with us for almost 50 years, or a little under 50 years.
Right.
But his image is now more popular than it was when he was around. Right. What I'm seeking to say is that Ethiopia, that used to be considered the poorest country in Africa, has perhaps one of the most identifiable personalities on earth coming out of it, not by virtue of its own investment in celebrating that, but because of some people out here who decide that the Ethiopian flag, its colors, its people need to be understood as very, very much important and critical. So Rastafari is the avenue of the next 1,000 years. And I yes. say that as a pronouncement because reparations as an ethos is where we are heading. Yeah. The Black Lives Matter hashtag is about that. And this reparations has not begun overnight. From the decolonization, the First and Second World War are about this moment. Right. What I'm saying is them start over 100 years ago. And, yes. and we think that our lives are going to be changed by the stroke of a wand. And it's going to... Yeah, it's our work.
Yes, it's our work.
It's our being on the continuum, on that battlefield to take the baton. I mean, we're excellent relay runners, Jamaica. And so this we have to understand as such, that it is a template that our organic intellectuals have developed. Rastafari didn't come up with it in the 1930s. That journey come from the Maroons and pass on through various forms in our line. Took shape. Paul Bogle, Bedouin, all of that actually affords for us to stand here right now.
I was very grateful and honored as a woman because she's very important in the history of Rastafari, and that's Empress Menen. And to speak on her, you'd have to give another lecture. But thank you so very much for all the reasoning, the reasoning, for your Zeit, Dr. Jahlani, Edwin, Hamid, Niaah.
I want to say before you ease off just like that on Empress Menen, and this is a critical point that when His Majesty took the throne in 1930, he departed from anciency and tradition in ensuring that his Empress was crowned at the same time.
I know.
Normally it would have happened the next day in a very, unglamorous, so the fact is, and there are a number of gender stereotypes that His Majesty broke. He took Queen Elizabeth into a church that only males had previously gone in for 700 years, and things like that. The point is that His Majesty is clear about human equity And the conversation, I think, as much as Rastafari is seen to be patriarchal, I would argue that women in the movement are standing in the movement in strength and not in weakness. And what is not recognized is that it's the women who have been successfully internationalizing this movement. All
Yes.
of our major international administration, I mean, there's Rastafari outreach across the continent of Africa, Rastafari health practitioners, Rastafari building schools and conducting school operations in places like Ethiopia. Rastafari has become a non-governmental African developer. When Rastafari is journeying in Africa on that mission, it's only the Chinese and Europeans are there with him. But his missions are no different, but more intentionally Black Lives Matter. So I'm saying that there is a kind of underrated
Yes.
of the, and it's really the things that we do out of our pocket, you know, which are major things, that because government isn't throwing money away at it, it doesn't get cited as important.
Well, Dr. Niaah, I never knew your full name, you know, I keep calling it. I keep calling it so because it's so beautiful. I would like to thank you for giving us a 3-module lecture in the time. You gave us a history of His Imperial Majesty. I mean, a whole life history. For those of us who are researchers, I'm sure a lot of people they couldn't get a chance to function. They were writing all these notes. And you spoke about 1963 organization about the decolonization of Rastafari and of His Imperial Majesty coming to Jamaica and elevating Black people. Black people knowing that we are royalty. Black people knowing that we must have respect for ourselves and we must demand respect from others because of our heritage. This communication of Black people about Black Lives Matter. You touched on it in almost every angle you could, but relative to Rastafari, to let us know that it never started this morning. It never started last week. It never started this year. But the fight and the struggle for Black Lives Matter began and was again pushed forward with Rastafari. Rastafari, as a young girl, I must tell you that my life had changed because of a Rastaman downtown King Street where I work at a bank, who every day I walked into the office, every lunchtime I would go downstairs and I would buy orange from him and thing, and he would teach me how to eat. I was a young girl, like about 19, and he would tell me about respect for myself. It's a Rastaman that always comes to my mind with a lot of love. And he told me and taught me about his Emperor Haile Selassie and about Rastafari. It is years of listening to the elders like you, because you are now an elder, you know, because of your white beard. You might look pretty, but you're an elder. And what we have learned today about this man, Haile, through the life of Haile Selassie and through Rastafari, shows us the impact of Rastafari on Black Lives Matter. And I want to thank you to bring us to the knowledge of Black supremacy, to speak to us about decolonization, to speak to us about methods of communication in Jerusalem schoolroom that happens through a variety of methods, inclusive of reggae music, which is now documenting everything through the voices of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and all those wonderful musicians. And I hope that the message continues. And I know that Rastafari liberty is here forever and ever. Because again, it's the only, and I don't know what to describe it, consciousness of elevation, spiritually grounded in the ancestors' knowledge that has come to us through His Imperial Majesty and now through all the people who have pushed for it to be elevated. And
I want to say, you know, one of the best descriptions I've heard offered by a scholar, Carl Boyce Davis, is that Rastafari in the African diaspora in the West offers people international identity in the face of countries wanting to deport you and to destroy your face or to remove you. Rastafari offers a sense of pride and international identity. And that's been a key factor in its globalization, that it's a potpourri of intellectual ingredients that seeks to locate the self within a process and journey of becoming.
Okay. I'm trying to see all these questions. There's somebody here by the name, I'm sure you know the person, Tunde Bawaji.
Yes, I do.
More importantly, transforming their ideas into empowerment vistas for rallying the sailing of masses of youth looking for alternative avenues for endearing themselves to their ancestry.
Yeah.
It goes on and on. But right now I think we have reached a point where we have to end. He also says, forms the essential foundation, Rastafari religion bereft Jewish moorings. Your camp, Jerusalem. This exactly is what I'm talking about. I think our friends who have been watching and listening have grown immensely today, and will walk proud, and shoulders will be back, and they will feel the crown on their head as they trod. As Black people, knowing Black Lives Matter, and knowing, especially those who trod as Rasta, how proud they should be as Jamaicans, that Rastafari was birthed from long ago, yes, but from the soils of this earth. And I give thanks to you, Dr. Jahlani, Adwin, Hamin, Niaah.
Thanks, sister. Thanks, Queen Mother.
Ashe.
Thank you.